Waratah
The acting
South
manager
is
of the Hunter
one of a
Division
number of
Australia
areas
Post,
that are always
Mr. John
under
Earble,
risk.
says the Waratah South office is running at a substantial loss.
Waratah South area, the post office that is, hasn't been used to a great extent by the residents in the area for some years, and there's been a regular drop in business in that area.
Is it the case that it's losing money or that it's just not making profit?
No, it's the case as far as Waratah South and a number of other smaller post offices throughout Australia. We are losing money at them.
I was phone to pay the monthly bill, we got stamps, telegrams, pay the telephone account.
He believes the predominantly elderly population of the Waratah South area will be severely disadvantaged if the office is closed.
I'm trying to say that it's not economical enough. The business has dropped off over the last couple of years or something to that effect.
Do you think that's true?
No, I don't. I think it's another case of the bureaucracy trying to push the little man down again. They're just trying to shut these small places because they're not prepared to work something as a convenience. They just want it to make profit. That's all they can see.
Economically, it may not be viable to keep the Waratah South Post Office open, but it's hard for local residents to appreciate this when for many it provides the only banking and postal services they can conveniently use.
I can bear this way that we haven't got to race away down the road to get stamps. We have a box here to post our mail, and it's so convenient in this respect.
How's it going to affect you?
Well, I have no car or any way of transport, and I'd have to walk over to either Lambton or Waratah to get a stamp to post the letter.
Well, it is a disaster. I don't know what we're going to do.
The search detailed in the report released today began on August the 20th after 4 Sydney men were reported missing on a fishing trip off Shell Harbour. The search continued until August the 25th, RAF aircraft dropping marker buoys to determine the probable direction of a drifting boat. At the conclusion of the search, though, claims were made that the Coastal Surveillance Centre had been looking in the wrong area. Eventually, on September the 7th, the trawler Odin found the upturned drifting boat some 220 kilometres northeast of Newcastle. The fact that the boat was finally found northeast of Newcastle didn't really surprise authorities. In fact, this plot from the possible sighting by the RAF on the 22nd of August of an upturned boat shows the likely position of the drifting upturned boat. The current would take it up and would have brought it back down again.
The report shows that the planning of the search areas from the time that the Australian Coastal Surveillance Centre became responsible, and that was some 24 hours at least after the emergency could have occurred. But from that point on, the search was conducted in accordance with internationally accepted procedures. There was one failing, and that was in respect of the flare search on the evening of the 20th of August. But apart from that, it seems to me the report, the search was conducted in a proper manner, yes.
The inquiry has
Should
also
the search have started earlier then?
aluminium
Should
boat
that
which
system
went
be...
missing, and has found that it was fitted with an oversized motor and that with 4 men on board would have had only a limited ability to deal with rough seas.
What the report points up is the need to take action to try and prevent those kind of occurrences again in the future.
Ideally, federal authorities would like every boat going to sea to carry one of these, an EPIRB, Emergency Position Indicating Radio Beacon. Easily triggered in an emergency, it floats and automatically sends out a signal that's easily traced by aircraft. They cost about $250, not a lot in terms of saving lives or the cost of air searches. Unfortunately, however, it seems the states are the ones that are going to have to take action.
It's not a matter of legislation for me, rather for the states. It's a state responsibility. But what I would like to do is to raise with the relevant state ministers at the next meeting of the Australian Transport Advisory Council means by which we can raise public awareness of the hazards involved in going to sea in small boats, and secondly, to improve public education about the need to more properly adhere to proper sea safety practices.
Clear evidence of the burst of construction can be found here at Rutherford, where within sight of one another, a $4.4 million high school and a $2.1 million public school are nearing completion. Educational facilities like these have long been needed in Rutherford, which is experiencing steady residential growth, but it was only recently that the state government responded. The story is repeated elsewhere in the valley. The Teachers Federation says several new schools are needed, and many established schools are overdue for new facilities. The Federation points out that the 82-83 Capital Works program was cut by 30%, and that the state government is only now spending big to catch up. 19 projects are underway, worth $37.77 million. Tech colleges are getting a share of that money. Amongst the projects being built is this new tech in Medford. While this flurry of activity would seem to be good for the building industry and the region generally, it won't last. The Public Works Department says it will then be up to private enterprise to invest in building construction, and so do its bit for the economic recovery.
Nevertheless, the parade did pass the inspection of Air Marshal Evans. An inspection that wasn't taken lightly, because at other bases recently, a rerun of unsatisfactory parades has been ordered. In a morale-boosting speech, the Air Marshal said the Air Force was moving ahead decisively and asked for patience with short-term belt-tightening. Later, the Air Marshal talked about the capability of the Air Force once it is re-equipped with F-18.
We've got to consider the worst case in Australia, and let's say the worst case would be somebody trying to land troops here inside the country. It's unlikely. Clearly, we wouldn't want to fight any battles or campaigns that were manpower intensive, but we can minimise that disadvantage that this country has by using high technology and modern weapons, high firepower. And people have to get here across the sea or over it. And here, an aircraft with a multi-role like the F-18, it can be an air defence fighter, and also an anti-shipping aircraft, an extremely effective anti-shipping aircraft, can be armed with Harpoon missiles. You couldn't, for instance, have a fleet such as the British had at Falklands within 500 miles of these shores.
Newcastle Chamber Press Secretary Peter Evans says the budget doesn't do much to promote employment, decentralisation or tourism in the country. Three factors called for in a submission put to the Treasurer early last month. Mr Evans says the Federal Tax Office being established here is the key for further decentralisation. But private enterprise won't come unless the State Departments needed to service it follow the federal lead.
Well, clearly the government has listened to certain of the submissions made by our chamber in terms of land tax and payroll tax, but when you analyse them very closely, they're cosmetic to say the least. In terms of land tax, for instance, they're going to put a freeze on valuation increases over last year, but unfortunately our valuations were done 2 years ago, and the people in this area who are paying land tax have had 2 years of very, very heavy charges, and there's no retrospective benefit to those people. Hopefully, for the people with land with the small businessman may benefit in the year to come, but people who have expensive and valuable land, they're guaranteed an increase of 4.1%. So there's no comfort in what the Treasurer has to say as far as land tax is concerned.
You mentioned small business. What about the payroll tax ceiling lifting?
Well, that's only marginal. People employing 10 or a dozen people will certainly receive some benefit, but how many people happen to employ the precise number of people who will get the benefit? And I would suggest to you very few. I would like to see payroll tax phased out as quickly as possible, and to do that, of course, the state government is going to have to find revenue from another source, and I think we should be seeking, jointly with the state government, to get a fairer share of the Commonwealth revenue.
It would appear from Mr Booth's figures presented last night that the Hunter region, they will be getting quite a slice of the money being spent on capital works. Are you happy in that regard?
Well, it looks that way, but one would have to identify the source of the contribution to the power stations and so on, to examine closely just where the employment opportunities will be derived in those developments. Hopefully it'll be local, but until we've had a close look at it, one can't really say.
$89.9. He claims the price cuts by his competitors are irresponsible.
If you're going to discount to the state that they're doing, there's only one way for it. They're going to go out backwards. They can't stay there.
Some people might say if they can sell for 47.9 cents a litre, why can't you?
Well, let's put it this way. The people who are getting a reasonable margin are going to be in business a lot longer than the fly-by-nighters.
BP proprietor Ian Cummings, however, defended his price cut.
We're just losing too much volume and we have to pay our rent, so we've got to attempt to pay it. So this way we go broke slowly. And the other thing is to keep faith with the customers that we've already got. If they see fuel at a lower price somewhere else, they wonder why we can't match their price. So we've got to make an attempt to stay in business and to compete.
The purpose of the book really is to show people how beautiful Lake Macquarie is, both the locals, that perhaps look at the area in a different way through the viewfinder, and also people who live overseas in the state or in other places.
The book features 80 pages and over 170 full-colour photographs showing the beauty of Lake Macquarie and its shoreline and the many activities lakegoers can enjoy. The history of the district and its economic base are also discussed, but as author Robert Wilson explains, it's the emphasis on the people of the district which distinguishes this book from its forerunner, Lake Macquarie, which the council first published 7 years ago.
I think the people, as much as anybody else, it's easy to write about things, but I think it's much more important to write about people and their hopes, their aspirations. Let's provide the feeling of what Lake Macquarie is all about, I think.
Do you think the book will be of interest to a wide range of people?
I think it will. I think both for people who live here and for people who live in other areas. I think particularly for the people who live here, because we're all guilty of often not knowing what our area is all about.
The proof comes in the form of the painting from a 9-year-old Chinese boy, Jing Engo. Engo met Mr. Hawke during the Prime Minister's visit to the Shanghai School for Talented Young Artists in February this year. The paintings were presented to the member for Newcastle, Mr. Alan Morris, by Dr. Xu and Dr. Tong. Both doctors are in Newcastle from Shanghai for a year's study as part of their Master of Sciences degree in epidemiology. Mr. Morris says he's happy to accept the paintings on the Prime Minister's behalf. He says the paintings further illustrate the growing bond between Australia and China.
Flood in Toongabbie Creek at Seven Hills. He was swept off his feet and sucked underground through a newly constructed Storm Beast had been wading in the water with 2 schools down 1 kilometre downstream. Kevin had the alarm at nearby houses.
Residents in Hillsborough are worried that the same thing could happen in their suburb with this open-air drain. Residents say that during times of high rainfall, this watercourse, which meanders its way through several backyards, becomes a torrent. Mr. John Rogers says his backyard at times has been completely flooded, and he wants the Lake Macquarie City Council to install pipes along this potentially dangerous waterway.
it comes down to here, it's stormwater really comes through here, and it comes through quite rapidly. And, well, this yard will flood. It will flood right back to the house. But the main problem is that the water running through it tends to back up from the corner. And even when it doesn't flood the yard, the water here is still moving very quickly, and, well, children are quite attracted to it. And, well, I see that the same sort of incident that happened recently in Sydney could happen here again.
Mr. Rogers says he could follow the lead of his neighbours and build a fence, but he says that won't stop the flooding.
Now, what approaches have you made to the council?
Well, I've been to a meeting, and I was told that it was up for approval either at the end of the year or early next year. But they've told me that at the moment there's insufficient funds for it. But that seems to have been their general reply over quite a number of years, so I've been informed.
From Fashion on Ice, raised by the school,
something else.
Shopping Square has done it all. Last night we saw the installation stations being very shops in the complex.
Interesting gown with the matching bathers and skirts from Maglia.
Garments, but also the smell of the famous Aussie barbecue. From a model. But for one young lady, that situation just couldn't be tolerated.
While the match proved little as regards the result, it included some bright spots, with Newcastle captain and national selector Rick McCosker continuing today where he left off last night and compiling an unbeaten 189 after being 120 overnight. The Newcastle selectors must be rueing McCosker's decision to retire from first-class cricket at the end of last season. New South Wales came back to the crease with a lead of 47 after the locals had closed at just 4 down for 362. They batted for 2 full sessions, to be 2 for 196 at stumps, with captain Dirk Wellham on 28 and Trevor Chappell on 21. Peter Clifford was out 93 and John Dyson out for 50. Best Newcastle bowler today was David Palmer, who finished with 2 for 46 off 25 overs.
According to Mr. Derek Brown, an advisor on noxious plants to the New South Wales Department of Agriculture, every effort is being made to prevent the Parthenium weed from getting a stronghold in this state. The reason is simple. It's a danger not only to agriculture but to human health. It can cause respiratory problems and severe dermatitis in humans. Stock too can develop severe skin reactions, and infested paddocks can be totally destroyed by the weed. Controlling it, however, is a problem in itself. In Queensland, authorities are attempting to confine it to the Central Highlands at a cost of $250,000 a year. How is the weed spreading from Queensland?
It is mainly spreading into northern New South Wales from Queensland, mainly through, at this stage, with harvesting equipment coming into New South Wales, contract harvesting.
What measures are being taken to prevent it from spreading?
The Department of Agriculture, in conjunction with local government in northern New South Wales, have mounted an intense awareness and control campaign and are controlling the scattered infestations that currently have occurred in northern New South Wales. In addition to that, we are currently devising legislation that will prohibit the movement of contaminated harvesting equipment coming into New South Wales from Queensland.